Well, welcome. Great to have everybody here. We're going to be, as I mentioned, through the summer, we're going to be hitting some, doing a few lunch and learns. We've got kind of busy family schedule of being in lots of different places, so we'll be filling in between those and probably doing some at different time zones to maybe see if anybody's interested on the East Coast during their lunch or the West Coast, or maybe some in better times for Europe. So thank you all for coming. We're going to be talking about agile teams and hybrid work. And I think that's something we're probably all kind of experiencing in one way or another, either in our own working, where we're working, or with other companies and places that we're interacting with. So let's dive into that. When I think of the term hybrid, I think of mythical beasts. So this, here's one mythical beast. This is the Chimera. Chimera. I may be pronouncing it wrong, but it's a lion and it's a goat. You can't see the goat very well. This is on a postage stamp. This is actually a drawing of a bronze statue. It's kind of hard to get a good angle of it. The goat's got its tongue out and there's a snake as the tail. It's these three things together. And this represents like evil and bad, things not working well together and stuff. And in Greek mythology, the Chimera was eventually killed by Bellerophon and riding his winged horse Pegasus, and because the Chimera was destroying countryside and doing all kinds of damage and stuff like that. Chimera. Okay, thanks. Appreciate the pronunciation. Okay, so this is one hybrid beast, right? This may feel familiar when we hear the word hybrid, but here's another hybrid beast. And this is the griffin. And the griffin generally represented all that's good, right? It represented the guardian against evil. As a matter of fact, the medieval church used the griffin in a lot of its iconography to represent Christ, because it had the dualism of Christ of having being from heaven, but also being fully God and being fully man. So the griffin, as far as being representing something with hybrid, is kind of the opposite of the Chimera, and or Chimera. I think I'm saying that right now. I'll have to look it up and actually listen to it. I should have done that before I did this. And what I want to ask you is, which mythical beast best represents your experience with hybrid work? Is that the Chimera, which is like a monstrosity of all these things together that don't actually represent what you want, or the griffin? I think I spelled it differently here, but the griffin, which is like it makes everything work smoothly, a guardian against evil. Which represents your experience with hybrid work? Excuse me. Sorry about that. My mute button is kind of far away. Our kids were supposed to go to a camp with their cousins in Tulsa this past week, and the power went out through all Tulsa. They had a big storm. And so we brought all the kids and the cousins here and created our own mini camp. But through that, I didn't get much sleep and ended up picking up a cold. But we had a great time. Okay, so it looks like we've got most of us, or 72% of us, are actually getting the good aspects of the hybrid. So that's great. That's really good to hear, because a lot of people I've talked to are more in this bottom thing of experiencing all the worst aspects of it. So how do you prefer to work? Remote, hybrid, or in person? What's your preference? Now, not what's most efficient, but what's your actual preference? So remote, where you're mostly at home, very rarely going and meeting in person. Hybrid is whether you're on some type of schedule, maybe one day a week in the office, or something like that, or a few days of the week in the office. And in person, which is where you're primarily in the office and maybe occasionally working from home. It depends. Okay, so it looks like the majority here really would prefer working at home, and that makes sense. I fall in that camp too. Well, I like the remote with in person maybe once a month or something like that. Totally, Taylor's a people person, so she wants to be in person. Now, remote where I'm not in constant contact with people, I hate. Yes, it depends a lot on the culture. That's a good point. So what do you feel is the most efficient way to work? So now this isn't what you like or what's comfortable. What's more efficient in terms of what lets your teams deliver? Now, this is interesting. What I want to point out here is that our distribution is a little bit different. Some of us prefer to work remotely, but we actually feel we're more efficient in a hybrid environment or in an in-person environment. Um, that's not bad. It's okay for us to prefer something that's not the most efficient. There's lots of things, I prefer sitting in a hammock reading a book. That's not necessarily the best, most efficient way for me to develop software. But that's okay. Okay, so the type of hybrid matters though, and the point I want us to kind of be thinking about here is that um, there's lots of ways to do hybrid, and there's some ways that will produce the Chimera, and there's some ways that will produce the Griffin. Hybrid can follow the Agile principles, or it cannot. I apologize here. Just let me mute just a second and get a good cough in. Sorry about that. I was speaking just fine earlier. Okay. Hybrid can follow the Agile principles or it cannot. And so how we actually structure what we're actually doing is probably more important than whether it happens to be hybrid or remote or in person. So let's look at, when I was thinking through this, I think, like, what are the different work location models and what does that look like? So you got fully on site, everybody on site all the time. You got fully remote where people are all the time remote, maybe occasionally getting together for special events, but for the most part, everybody's remote. That's the default way of working. And then hybrid work, which is where you're kind of scheduling on a regular basis to get together. Most of the places that call it hybrid work are getting together once, like at least once a week. But then we've also got time models, right? We can be working in a way that's asynchronous, which means people aren't on at the same time. I'll do work, send you emails, or post things in Jira, and you'll look at it later. And then you're going to look at it and get back to me. If you've worked with people that are in other time zones, like off by 12 hours, that's the way a lot of times that works. Synchronous, which is where, like, if you're in person, all in the office together, that's going to be synchronous. You're just back and forth all at the same time. And then overlapping, which is where you've got maybe, like, I've worked with teams where they said, okay, we want to make sure that we're overlapping for at least 6 hours of the day. So, so our time zones may not completely align, but we want everybody to make sure that they're working by 10 a.m. and stay, or 10 a.m. for Central Time and stay till at least 2 p.m. for Central Time. Make sure we're overlapping during those time periods. I guess that'd be 4 hours, but you get the idea of saying we're going to overlap. Okay, so if we graph these things out, we end up with something that looks like this. And the point I want to make is we can try to do, we can even try to do on-site and be asynchronous, which is everybody's going and working a different hour. We're all sharing a desk, and I work for 8 hours, then you come in and work at the desk for 8 hours, and somebody else comes in and works at the desk for 8 hours. And we're on site, but we're not synchronous, right? We're not actually overlapping the time that we work. And so if we go back and we look at the Agile principles and say business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project, how easy is it to do this on this little grid that we did here? Well, if we're going to work together with business people daily on the project, it's probably going to be a lot harder. Anything that's going to fall into the asynchronous is probably going to be difficult to do because we're not there where we can actually work together daily. Now, we could send emails back and forth and stuff, but that's not really going to work. It's not going to give us what Agile is trying to push us to do with the principles. Now, if we're overlapping and on-site, maybe that's easier. As a matter of fact, a lot of places work like that. The business people and the developers overlap. They get together for a few hours and work together on a regular basis. Hybrid, you could do it. Maybe there's a way for you all to get together and work together on the hybrid if you're overlapping. Also with remote, there's ways to do that. So I put question marks there. And these aren't, my goal here isn't to say this is true and this is true and you can't do this like this. My goal is to get us thinking about how are we actually following the Agile principles within the grid of how we're working. And if we're working in a way where we're making it really hard to follow the Agile principles within our context and where we're working, maybe we should try to change something so it's easier to follow the principles. So another principle, the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within the development team is face-to-face conversation. Well, That's probably going to be very hard to do if we're asynchronous and no one's even working at the same time. It's also going to be hard to do if we were remote and no one's actually got the technology to actually do face to face. Now we can do stuff with video that will get us a lot of that, but if we're just remote, just sending email, it's going to be very, very hard to follow that principle. And then with hybrid and overlapping, there may be ways to follow it, but if we're really careful about doing it. Another principle: the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. The teams trying to self-organize, being in a situation where that's all asynchronous and we're trying to self-organize by sending emails and then waiting 12, 24 hours before we hear back, that's going to be really hard to self-organize. So I see these are Agile principles that I question, especially in today's world where more and more people are working remotely. And I think that's a good point. What I found effective, though, is if I go through here, and we got somebody saying they just don't agree that it's more efficient to be face-to-face. My experience has been on Teams is that people are just working completely remotely. Like, I've seen people try different things. I've seen teams working extremely remotely where they're just pinging each other on text messages and stuff like that. And I've seen teams do well with that. I've also seen teams that they get on and they don't do video. Like, they don't do face-to-face. They're remote. They're not doing face-to-face. They can't see each other, but they've got an audio channel up and they're talking, working. And that I've actually seen outperform the direct messaging to each other because there's that real-time aspect to it that's even more real-time than the text messaging. And it's faster. It's not as much of an interaction because you can talk while you're doing things. Then I've also seen teams that create just virtual video team rooms and trying to follow the Agile principles. And they're like, we're going to work together, at least for some portion of the day, the same way we would if we were all in the same team group together. That is culturally, that is kind of hard for people to get used to sometimes. But the teams I've seen that have embraced it were very, very, very effective with it. Now, I've seen teams embrace it that weren't effective because of other principles that they were struggling with, but it's the most effective way I've seen of people working remotely. Now, your experience may vary, and I'm not trying to say that just because I've had this experience, but I have seen it in enough places that I wouldn't discount it right away. It's a hard thing to get people used to doing, but most of the teams I've seen that got used to doing it are like, I've had some people tell me, I hated you when you were making us do this. As a coach, I was coming and saying, let's just try this. They said, I hated you making me do this, but now that I'm on another team that doesn't work like that, I can't stand it. And I'm just looking for some way to get back to that level of interaction because that's how I felt I was most effective and most productive and felt best about working. How comfortable something is initially is not a good indication of how effective it is. So this is something I was thinking about. So my daughter does, both of my kids do a lot of swimming. And my daughter does her freestyle is very beautiful, very, very smooth. It is like the complete opposite of what it looks like when I'm trying to do the freestyle. But she didn't start out like that, right? She started out when it was very uncomfortable. If she had decided that freestyle is not an efficient way to move through the water just because when she started out it didn't feel as efficient, she never would have gotten over that hump where it became a very efficient, very smooth way of doing things. And I think a lot of times it's easy to take an Agile principle that says, oh, it says face-to-face communication is the best way to do it. We'll do a video team room. We've tried it for 2 hours. Some people don't like, it's uncomfortable, so we're just going to shut it off and not use it. While we don't want to discount how people feel, we also want to recognize that there's some things that take a little while to get used to. And if you never get to the point that you get good at what you're trying to do, and being on video is one thing that takes a while to get used to. So question, does your way of working support following the Agile principles? Looking at some of the comments here. Does your way of working actually support your Agile principles? So how well do you think your way of working, on-site, remote, hybrid, whatever you're doing today, how well do you think it enables following the Agile principles? Okay, so it sounds like most of us feel like it's supported pretty well. Now, we may have a little bit of a selection bias. People that are willing to take their lunch break to come in and learn about Agile may be among the people that are being more effective with the way that they're using Agile. So that's expected. But, there's a little bit of space here for, maybe for some improvement. And what I want to encourage us isn't that we need to do that any of us need to do a particular thing that like we're mentioning here, but we should be striving to be more in this category if we can. That's part of the continual improvement. And as the work environment changes, as there's new tools and things like that, we need to always be looking for those things, because otherwise we could be, right here today, but if we don't keep working to improve it, we may move away from it in time. We may move away from what's actually optimal for us. So another thing in thinking about how we work remotely, so this is a handsaw, right? You got one person there using the handsaw going back and forth. If two people try to do this together, it's probably not going to be very effective, right? If I try to stick my hands in here, I'm more likely to get hurt than I am to help. On the other hand, when I grew up, we had one of these grew up on a very old farm that was, I think it was my great grandparents had homesteaded, and there was a saw like this there. And my friends and I would go out and we would go try to cut down a tree. Now I couldn't take this. I remember the first time we cut down like a 12-inch tree, and it was very, very exciting because we had done it by hand. But I could not take this out and do this by myself. I needed to have a friend there. If I go out there and I try to start doing this by myself, it doesn't work, because this tool is made for two people to use. It's much more effective for two people to use this tool than one person. It's not like one person is only half as effective as two people. It's like one person can't do much of anything, but two people together can actually cut down a tree pretty fast with this. But that one, well, probably. It looks a little bit rough, but probably. And the point I want to make is that a lot of the tools we have today for software development are set up to make it to where we really need multiple people looking at the same time. If I take if I'm working with something like, I'm thinking of AWS here. Well, actually, let me move on. Okay, so actually, let's do this, and then I think I'll get into the other thing. What type of saw is most similar to the type of tools your team uses today? Is it most like a single hand saw? Is it mostly like a two-person saw? Or are your tools more like sawing with a cheese stick? And the big point I want to make here isn't that something's right or wrong, but that there are tools that we use that are much more effective to use if we're collaborating together. There are things that are much faster to do, like having one person trying to use that two-person saw. I would argue that things like AWS are much, if you're trying to develop software on AWS for most types of things, two people working on the same task together is going to be much, much faster in terms of what you're delivering than two people working separately. Now, it depends on the people and a lot of that, but there's a lot less time spent just writing code and a lot more time trying to make sure, like, okay, what's this particular call I need to make? How do I set up this particular thing to deploy? And there's lots of stuff that can happen, even if it's the two people mostly working in parallel, but on the same thing. So I would actually suggest that we may be thinking here and see how many people think it's a single hand saw, that a lot of the stuff, if you're deploying to the cloud and using a lot of those tools like Docker and different things like that, those may be more of two-person saws than they are like single hand saws. It depends on a lot of things, but it's really easy to overestimate how effective it is for people to work in parallel on separate things and not see the value, see how much faster it is when you've got people working together. So these are some of the tools that are common today, and these are tools that I've found in my experience. If people are working on stuff, they're using these types of tools, they're probably going to be a lot more effective working with someone than if they are working just on their own. Now, there obviously are exceptions to this. But if you're developing these type of environments, this is not the same thing as sitting down and trying to write a sorting algorithm. If you're working on something that has a sorting algorithm that's going to be, maybe 20 lines of code, and you need to be completely focused in just writing those 20 lines of code, that is a very different environment than trying to figure out, how do I take this data, sort it in some way, stick it in the database, and then send it onto a message somewhere else. That last thing of putting it describes a lot of what business work looks like. AWS and all these tools give us ways of doing that are very, very efficient if we know what they are. And so you spend more time often looking for the best way to do it with your tool than you do just writing lines of code. I would say in lots of situations, the number of lines of code that people need to write to accomplish a business goal has gone dramatically down over the years, but the amount of knowledge they have to know about their tool has gone dramatically up. And so that's where two people working on something, even if there's a large overlap between what they know, the stuff that they know that the other person doesn't know really helps with your cycle time of getting things done. So other point of a lot of these agile principles is they're focused on collaboration because collaboration encourages focus. If we if you're one of the big things I found when I'm pair programming or working directly with someone is if I get stuck on my own, I'm more likely to stick with that for a long time before I ask for help, or get distracted with something else, right? However, if I'm working with someone, we tend to keep each other focused, and we also put ourselves in a situation where we're more willing to give up if we discover that we're actually stuck. I've seen people go off by themselves and work on something, and after 2 weeks, they come back and say, yeah, I got stuck on this. Well, they've been stuck for 2 weeks. But if there's two of them working on it together, and I know I'm smart, I know you're smart, and both of us can't figure it out, it's no longer a sense of pride for me to go ahead and just keep on barreling through it because you can't figure it out either. So now I've got some social proof that means this is actually really hard. Maybe we're doing this in the wrong way. Maybe we need to find somebody. Let's go ask for help. So two people are much, much faster at asking for help, usually, than one person working on their own that's like, well, I know I'm smart, so I just need to keep on plowing through this. That in itself can be a huge difference in how long it takes you to deliver software. Can be a huge difference in how long it takes you to deliver software, because if that happens over and over again, and I keep running into things and then I plow through it and I get distracted and stuff and I'm discouraged, it's going to take me a lot longer to deliver stuff. And I may end up finding ways to make it work that are just like brute force. I may find ways to do something with thousands of lines of code when really there was a 2-line way of doing it that I just happened to not know about from our tool. So this collaboration is really a really big deal. I'm going to try to do a session here. We need to practice a few times to make sure we've got it worked out, but with my 13-year-old son, and we're going to try to do some pair programming just to show you what that looks like on a simple algorithm. So that will probably be coming in the next few months. But collaboration also encourages focus because if both of us are working on something together, we will push each other. Like imagine that you want to get in shape and you're going to go on walks regularly. Well, if you're just going by yourself, now some people just like being by themselves and maybe that works well. But for a lot of people, if I've got a buddy I'm going for a walk on, I'm much more likely to go a little bit further. I'm much more likely to do it on days where I don't feel like it because I'm working with someone now. So here's an example of me exercising on some of our exercise equipment with a buddy that's helping me stay focused on what I'm trying to do here. So here I'm exercising, and then I've got my accountability partner right down here who's walking along with me to make sure I go ahead and walk. And together, now, Bella, our dog, will walk a lot farther if she's walking with me than if we just tell her to go get on the treadmill. I'll walk farther because I'm like, I need to give my dog some exercise. Let's see, can I do that again? Play it one more time in case it didn't show for some people. So that's it's been a huge deal being able to get her on the treadmill because if it's raining outside, and she could go a lot faster than that, but that's just what I had a video of. So, but keep this in mind though, together, even though it's my dog that I'm collaborating with on walking, it still helps me do more stuff that I would be able to do on my own. Okay. So this was only a 30-minute Lunch and Learn, so let's go to the quiz section of things. Then I'll stick around and answer some questions if my throat can stand. I'd like to hear what people think. So we're going to do a 5-question quiz. We will give away one of the Turn Your Video On t-shirts because that kind of fits well with this. I think I've got every size still. I may be short on the mediums, but I think I've got every size still. So whoever wins this, I will send you a Turn Your Video On t-shirt, which is, I created these when I was working with a team that we were really trying. Everybody was working remote because we were in the middle of COVID, and we were trying to get that collaboration together. So everybody had these shirts that said "Turn Your Video On." So if you were on without your video, you're looking at a sea of people with their shirts saying "Turn Your Videos On." Oh, you got comment? Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. Okay, while you join, I'm going to check the chat here really fast. I like this comment here that asking for help is a key IT skill. And there's lots of stuff we could talk about that within the within having an environment to where it feels okay to ask for help. And if we're both collaborating on something, it's a lot more comfortable for me to ask for help. I was working with a team that was they were working remote, but they were working with that, I get assigned something and I go and work for a week, just heads down and come back with it. And these people they were very, very smart, very, very skilled, and they would deliver, but often through brute force. And the quality of our code, once we started saying, okay, we're not going to touch any code unless there's a pair of people working on it. Once we started doing that, the quality of our code went up and our cycle time went up significantly, much faster than it was. It more than made up for the fact that we had two people working on something at the same time. Now, once they got used to that, and it was very uncomfortable at first, like it was like me trying to do the freestyle, very, very uncomfortable, very, very awkward. Once we got to the point, though, that it was comfortable, we then kind of relaxed that requirement. People would pair when it was effective, but there was something that was like writing the algorithm where it just needed one person or is more of copy and pasting stuff. They'd work on those separately. But it took making it required to get people over the hump to where they were comfortable with it. And then we had kind of the best of both worlds. Okay, so the quiz. Let's go. Which mythical beast do we want hybrid work to be like? Do we want it to be like the griffin, the chimera, or the two-headed sloth? Yes, throughput. If I said something wrong, I meant that they actually accomplished more in less time. More stuff was delivered to the customer. I may have said something incorrectly there. Thanks for noticing. Okay, so yes, the mythical beast we want to be most like is the griffin. Very good. Which option is the hardest to follow Agile principles? So which of these ways of working makes it hardest to follow Agile principles based on what we talked about? Synchronous on-site, overlapping hybrid, asynchronous remote, or overlapping remote? So yes, it's the asynchronous remote. If we aren't working at the same time and we aren't working in the same place, that's probably the hardest way to actually follow the Agile principles, because a lot of the principles require or push us toward having collaboration that would be hardest to do in this type of situation. Mark said that modern tools like AWS, Azure, Docker, etc. require more what to be used efficiently? More team members, more budget, more managers, more collaboration, or more cowbell? I have not tried using cowbell with these tools. It might actually be effective, though. I don't know. But yes, more collaboration. The point being that a lot of these tools, just by the nature of what they do, require a lot less code and a lot more thinking and knowledge about how the tools work. That means that they're a lot more effective to collaborate around. Two-head sloth with cowbells, yes. They're a lot more effective to collaborate around because we all know different aspects of things. Okay, in our leaderboard, we've got Jeff in the top spot, followed by Alex, Brandon, Trip, and Mo. Next question. Mark compared modern tools to using a nail gun, a one-handed saw, a two-person saw, or a theremin. A theremin is that instrument that makes music depending on how close your hand is to it. I haven't ever played one before, but they sound cool. So yes, a two-person saw, because there's a lot of things that are one person working on it isn't just half as effective as two people. Sometimes it's very, very hard to make progress at all. Okay, leaderboard, we've got Alex M is in the top spot, followed by Jeff, Brandon, Trip, and Michael. And last question here. When considering different ways of working, which item is least correlated with successful teamwork? Which item is least correlated with successful teamwork? The ease of collaboration, how well it enables rapid delivery, how comfortable it makes you feel personally, or how well it enables face-to-face communication. So yes, just because something is uncomfortable for you, particularly at the beginning, it isn't the best way of telling how effective it is. Now, if it makes you completely shut down and a nervous breakdown from doing it, if we say we're going to work and everybody's going to be on a glass floor 2,000 feet above a deep canyon, there are some things that maybe make you very uncomfortable and maybe would. But for the things we're talking about, just because something's uncomfortable when you start with it, it may just be a matter of getting used to something new. There's lots of situations where, like I mentioned with swimming, where something isn't comfortable at first until you really learn how to do it. And once you learn how to do it, you own it, and it's not an uncomfortable thing. Public speaking is another big thing like that. Okay, and it looks like Alex in takes the top spot. Congratulations. Followed by Jeff, Brandon, Tripp, Dustin. So Alex, send me an email. We will get you a shirt headed your way this week. So I wanted to cover, just leave you with a few images in your mind. So we want to be more like the Griffin, less like the Chimera. Modern tools may be more like one of these two-handed saws, to where you're more than twice effective with two people using it, because one person trying to push on it just doesn't work very well at all. And there are some things that may make us uncomfortable at first that become very comfortable once we get used to it. We don't want to deprive ourselves of something that would be very, very effective and easy for us just because the learning stages of it make it uncomfortable. So that covers today's 30-minute whirlwind. It looks like I'm over by 2 minutes. I'd love to hear any questions, comments that people have. What do you think? What are you running into? Thank you so much for coming, and be watching for another invite coming up in the next few weeks. I'm not sure when the next one's going to be. I need to check our family calendar. But thank you so much for coming. Any thoughts or comments?
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for the well wishes on feeling better. Sorry for my snorting and coughing. Look back through the comments here.